Hi everyone, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who don't know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. So last week we were talking about how Socrates actually had a lot of the basic fundamentals of Jesus' teachings as well as Spiritism teachings. And so as the Spirit said in this book, it's important to note Socrates and to realize what he was saying and what he was practicing and teaching, because a lot of these things are the root of what comes back in Jesus' teachings and Spiritism. And last week we were also talking about how it's fundamental that there were people that came before Jesus to introduce these ideas, because if Jesus just came and said a bunch of stuff that no one was even familiar with, it would have been hard to accept it. But there was people along the way that have been coming and kind of introducing those ideas slowly but surely, so that when Jesus came, they already had a little awareness of it, and it was easier for them to accept because it wasn't the first time they were hearing that stuff. So they split up some of Socrates' teachings into numbers, and so we left off on number 7. The constant preoccupation of the philosophers, as understood by Socrates and Plato, is to take great care of the soul, less with respect to the present life, which lasts but an instant, but more with respect to eternity. As the soul is immortal, would it not be more prudent to live our lives bearing this fact in mind? Both Spiritism and Christianity teach the same thing, right? Because this is saying that it's not, in this case they were saying philosophers, but the main thing we should be worried about is not this life that we have, which is so quick, but eternity, right? Christianity teaches that, and so does Spiritism. And it might be in different words, but it all comes down to that basic principle that even Socrates was saying. Number 8. If the soul is immaterial, after its life, it will have to go to a world that is equally invisible and immaterial, the same way as the body decomposes and returns to matter. However, it is very important to clearly distinguish the pure soul, which is truly immaterial and which nourishes itself, as God does, from thoughts and the science, from that of the soul which is more or less sustainable by impurities of a material nature. This impedes elevations to all that is divine, and in fact causes it to be retained in its earthly surroundings. As we can see, both Socrates and Plato understood perfectly the different levels of the dematerialized soul. They insisted on the varieties of situations resulting from its more or less purified state. When they said, though, intuition, Spiritism proves by the numerous examples that it's placed before us. So, as we talked about when we were studying the Spirits book together, we know that there's the different levels of spirits. So, there's the least pure, and there's the most pure, and everywhere in between, right? Like a little staircase, we can call it, to get to the top. And our goal for everyone is to get to that purified state at the top, right? To be the most evolved. But we can see here that even Socrates had the same concept, and he understood that we're going to be at different levels, and with these different levels we're going to be in different worlds, and the most evolved, the pure spirits, are going to have no material traces, right? Completely invisible, completely immaterial. But then as you go getting as you're a little farther away from perfection, you start getting this more material body to go through your trials and expiations. But we can see that this basic Spiritism principle was already being introduced at the time of Socrates. Number 9. If death meant the complete dissolution of the person, then the bad spirits would have much to gain from death, as they would find themselves at one and the same time free from body, soul, and vices. Only those who adorn their soul not with strange ornaments, but with those that are corporate, may wait their hour of their return to the other world with tranquility. This is equal to saying that materialism, when it proclaims that there is nothing after death, all previous moral responsibilities, this being consequently an inductive to badness, and that badness has everything to gain from nothingness. Only the person who has divested themselves of all vices and become enriched with virtues can await the awakening in the other life with tranquility. By means of example, which are offered to us daily, Spiritism shows how painful it is to see those who are bad to pass over into this other life. So here, again, Socrates is showing a basic Spiritism, Spiritist concept in that there has to be something after death for all of us, and it's going to continue based on how you lived this life, because they're saying if bad spirits, if material death was the end of it, then bad spirits would have no reason to be good, right? They would just do bad things and then they would die and get away with everything that they just did. So there would be no purpose, no point. And so they're saying, no, all are gonna, and we study this in Spiritism, right? Everyone is going to disincarnate, and if you're doing bad things, then you're going to suffer, and that's not going to be the end, right? Just because this material body dies, that's not going to be the end of your suffering for the actions that you've done. So, which makes more sense, because, or else everyone would just be getting away with doing everything. Number 10. The body retains the well-impressed digestion of the care it receives, as well as the marks of all accidents suffered. The same applies to the soul. When it disposes of the body, it maintains evidence the features of its character, its affections, as well as the marks that have been left on it by the various occurrences during its life. Thus, the worst thing that can happen to a man or a woman is to return to the other world with his or her soul ladened with crimes. You see calluses that neither you nor Pulex nor Georges can prove that we should lead a different life that can be used when we find ourselves on the other side. From so many different opinions, the only one which is unshakable is that it is better to receive than to commit an injustice, and that, above all else, we must be careful not to just to seem like, but actually be men and women of goodness. And this was taken from a dialogue between Socrates and his followers when he was in prison. So again, we see that it's not about, you can't just do bad things and get away with them, right? Because when you go to the spirit world, that's going to follow you there. And even if it was a physical thing and you don't have that physical body, it'll still show. And like they said, it's better to be in the receiving end than the committing end of a crime, of an injustice. Because if you're receiving it, yeah, that's going to be bad for you, but you just have to learn to deal with that. And it's the way you react to that situation that's going to determine how you're doing, what your goodness is. But the person that's committing the injustice, they're going to have to live with that and have to make up for that. And they're the ones that are going to live with that that pain, that negativity on them. So again, and it said, above all else, we have to remember that we can't just pretend to be good. We have to actually be good. Because even if you're pretending, when you get to the spirit worlds, there's going to be nothing to hide behind, right? You can't pretend. It's wide out in the open. So it's not just about pretending to be good, but actually being good. Here we face yet another point of capital importance, which experience has provided to us. That the soul, which is not yet purified, retains the ideas, tendencies, character, and passion which it had while on earth. It is not the maxim, is it better to receive than to commit an injustice, entirely Christian? Jesus expressed the same thought when he said, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, then offer the other one as well. Right? So it's not about the person that's doing injustice. And often when someone does something to us, we want to do it back, or we want to be mean back. But that is just making us worse, right? Because now we're committing the injustice. But instead, yeah, we're going to be upset, but the way we react to that, we forgive that person, and we do our best to keep continuing and hoping that person the best, then we're not going to have any of that negativity, but that person will have to take responsibility for those actions that they did. But if we go and do something worse back, then we're just the same as that person, and we're also going to have things to repay and a weight on our shoulders. Number 11. One of two things. Either death is the absolute destruction, or it is the passing of the soul into another place. If everything is extinguished, then death would be like one of those infrequent nights when we do not dream nor have any conscience of ourselves. However, if death is but a change of habitation, then the passageway to the place where the dead must meet, what happiness to find there all those that we have known. My greatest pleasure would be to closely examine the inhabitants of this other home, and to distinguish them, as we do here, which of those who deem themselves worthy are actually so considered. But it is time to part, me to my death, and you to life, which Socrates said to his judges. According to Socrates, those who lived upon the earth met again after death and recognized each other. Spiritism shows that relationship continues to the extent that death is not an interruption nor the cessation of life, but rather an inevitable transformation without any discontinuity. If Socrates and Plato had known what Christ was to teach 500 years later, and which Spiritism now spreads, they would have said exactly the same things. There is nothing surprising in this fact, however, if we consider that all great truths are eternal, and all advanced spirits had to know them before they came to earth, in order to be able to deliver them. We may consider even further that Socrates and Plato, together with all the other great philosophers of those great times, could have later been among those chosen to uphold Christ in his divine mission, being chosen precisely because they were more apt to understand his sublime teachings. It also appears highly probable that today they participate in the host of spirits charged with teaching mankind the same truths. So, as we see again, Socrates is just saying another one of these points 500 years before Jesus and so many more years before Spiritism came out. They were saying these same things, but which makes sense, right? Because if we are thinking about it, Socrates, these evolved spirits who are coming here to set this path and to teach us these teachings, they're more evolved than we are. So, of course, they all have this basic understanding of the truth, right? That we don't have yet. So they're coming down and sharing that with us. So that's why we're not surprised that they're saying the same things, because they're all these highly evolved spirits that are all joining together, and they all are learning the same thing and coming down to teach us. Number 12. Never return one injustice with another, nor harm anyone, no matter what harm they may have done to us. Few, however, will admit this principle, and those who disagree will beyond doubt do nothing but despise one another. Is this not the principle of charity, which prescribes that we do not return evil for evil, but that we forgive our enemies? So just again, like we were talking about, don't return injustice to another, right? If someone does something to you, do something worse to them. To forgive them, right? Because that's going to heal us, and they're just going to still have to live with what they did, but that's not going to affect us. But if we do something worse, now we have that affecting us and on top of our conscience. And again, same thing that Jesus and Spiritism has taught us, just way before that. 13. We recognize the tree according to its fruit. Every action should be qualified by what it produces. qualifies as evil when it causes evil, and goodness when it produces goodness. The maxim, "It is by the fruits that we know the tree," is repeated many times throughout the gospel. And so they frequently say this, that teaching that a tree is known by its fruits. So if you're a good tree, then you're producing good fruits and people will know that, right? Or if you're a bad tree, or even if you look like a good tree, but the fruits that you're giving is bad, then that means truly you are a bad tree, right? So that's a common expression that we find throughout the gospel and throughout our teachings. And Socrates was saying this 500 years before Jesus. 14. Riches are a great danger. Every man who loves riches does not love himself or what he possesses, but something that is even more strange than that which he possesses. So again, this is touching on that topic that people who are very materialistic are focusing on the wrong thing, right? Because they're not truly loving themselves. They don't even love all that material stuff that they have, right? It's just being greedy and selfish. 15. The most beautiful prayer and the most beautiful sacrifices mean less to God than a virtuous soul who has struggled to be like him. It has been a grave error to think that the gods dispense more attention to their offerings than to our souls. If that were the case, then the greatest culprits would become favored. But no, the truly just and upright are those who, by their words and deeds, fulfill their duties to the gods and humanity. Again, so this is saying, because we know at that time people did sacrifices to the gods and tried to do these crazy, beautiful prayers to the gods. But he's saying, if that isn't what's most important is to follow God's, at that time, it was God's law, right? Jesus didn't even have his teachings at that time yet. It was to follow God's laws and do what God wants, and that speaks 1,000 times more louder than just making a beautiful prayer, a beautiful sacrifice, right? Which is, again, material. And often sometimes people make a beautiful prayer, but then they go and do the opposite thing. So what's really important is just practice those good, those justice and charity and love that God wants us to. 16. We call the person who loves his body more than his soul depraved. Love is everywhere in nature, and it calls us to use our intelligence. We even find it in the movements of the planets. It is love which covers nature with its richest carpet. It is decorated, and it makes homes where there are flowers and perfumes. It is also love that gives peace to mankind, calms the seas, silences the storms, and gives sleep to sufferers. Love, which will unite man through a fraternal link, is a consequence of Plato's theory on universal love as a law of nature. Socrates said, "Love is neither a god nor a mortal, but a great devil. That is to say, a great spirit that presides over universal love." This proposition was held against him like a crime. So here again, he's saying that love is everywhere, right? And that's what we wish to practice. That's one of the main things to follow. If we all love one another, then a lot of the problems wouldn't exist, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, love God. Like, if that was true to everyone, then a lot of our problems today wouldn't exist. And they also included this interesting fact at the bottom, that Socrates said that love is neither God nor immortal, but a great devil. And because he said this, actually, it says that to say that like a great spirit presides over universal love, because as we talked about, they said that in the beginning we talked about how in that time they used the word devil just as a spirit, a great spirit. So he was saying that a great spirit is like in control of all universal love, that presides over the universal love. And that is not true. And they said that this proposition was held against him like a crime. So that was like something he said inaccurately that eventually he had to make up for and learn that wasn't that. So even Socrates was still not that perfect state and still had some learning to do, but he was much more evolved than we are right now. 17. Virtue cannot be taught, but comes as a gift from God to those who possess it. This is almost the Christian doctrine of grace, but if virtue is a gift from God, then it is a favor, and we may ask why it is not conceded to all. On the other hand, if it is a gift, then there is no merit on the part of those who possess it. Spiritism is more explicit in saying that those who possess a virtue have acquired it through their own efforts during successive lives by riddling themselves little by little of their imperfections. Grace is a force that God gives to a well-meaning man or woman so that he or she may expulge their badness and so to be able to practice goodness. So again, this is the same basic concept, and we've elaborated more on it because those words aren't exactly what we're trying to say. So he just said that it comes as a gift from God. But from Spiritism, we learned that it's not just a gift that you get. Oh, here it is. You get this virtue. No, you have to work for it. You have to earn that, right? But eventually, yeah, those teachings are coming from God, and God's helping us to get those, to acquire those virtues that we're working towards. So it's not as a gift, right, that it's handed off. So, but again, this is the same basic principle so many years before, right? So it's set the way for people to be accustomed to these ideas, for then us to Spiritism to go and explain it further in depth. 18. The natural disposition shown by all is to perceive our defects far less than we see those of others. The gospel says, "You see the speck of sawdust that is in the eye of your neighbor, but you do not see the plank that is in your own eye." So again, just another thing that is a common teaching that we still say today that Socrates brought to us way back when. So, and this is a common thing that's important for us to think about in our daily lives, because often we'll be like, oh my God, look at that one little, like they said, the sawdust, like that one little sawdust in that person's eye. But you don't realize that there's a huge plank in your eye because you're not looking at your imperfections. You're just pointing out everyone else's. So it's important for us to notice when we're doing that and stop ourselves. 19. If doctors are unsuccessful in treating the majority of ailment, it is because they treat the body without treating the soul. If the whole is not in good condition, then it is impossible that part of it should be well. Spiritism offers the key to the relationship that exists between the soul and the body, so providing that one of them is constantly reacting to the other. This idea opens up a new field for science. With the possibility of showing the real cause of certain ailments, the way of curing them becomes easier. When science takes into account the spiritual element of the organism, then failures will be much less frequent. So they're saying that you can't cure someone if you can't just cure their physical body if their mental and their soul, that spiritual state, is not well, right? It needs to help both, and that's when that soul, that spirit will get better. Because if you're just fixing the physical body but not the soul, then that soul's still going to have those negativities, still having that those imperfections, and that's still going to cause them to feel unwell or have that sickness. So, and again, Spiritism has offered more of this relationship, and once science starts to accept it, then it will be easier to cure more effectively, because of that awareness of the spirit and of the soul and not just the physical body. 20. Right from infancy, man commits far more badness than goodness. In this sentence, Socrates touches on the grave question of the predominance of badness on earth. This is a question that is insoluble without knowledge of the plurality of worlds and the destiny of our planet Earth, inhabited as it is by only a fraction of humanity. Only Spiritism can resolve this question, which is more fully explained in chapters 3, 4, and 5. So here is just bringing another idea that he said, man on earth creates more badness than goodness. And they're saying that in Spiritism we see the explanation for this because we see that earth is a less evolved world, right? This is a less evolved world that we lived on. So people tend to be more bad than they are good. So we want to work to improve ourselves, right? But the plurality of worlds, so the fact that there's more than one world that spirits inhabit, shows us that, okay, yeah, our world is not that great, but there are other ones. Once you get there are other ones that are great. And then the last teaching that he brings is number 21. It is more judicious not to suppose you know that of which you are in ignorance. So, to kind of explain that sentence before their explanation, it's better to say that you don't know, right? To understand that you don't know, than to pretend that you know. This is directed at those who offer criticism about matters unknown to them, even in basic terms. Plato completes this thought of Socrates by saying, in first place, if it is possible, we must make them more honest in their words. If they are not, we shall not bother with them, and we shall seek nothing but the truth. We shall do our best to instruct them, but shall not insult them. This is how Spiritism should proceed in relation to those who contradict, whether in good or bad faith. If Plato were to reappear today, he would find things almost as they were in his time, and he would be able to use the same words. Socrates would also meet creatures that would jeer at his beliefs in Spiritism, and would believe him to be mad, together with his disciple Plato. It was for having professed these principles that Socrates saw himself ridiculed, accused of impiety, and condemned to drink hemlock. So absurdly, by reason of its controversy, stirring up many prejudices and striking against many prejudices, these great new truths will not be accepted without a fight or without making martyrs. So they're saying, so here again, this was directed to people say things and they pretend to know everything, but they don't, right? And we're only seeking the truth, so those people, just ignore them, just like the other way, because they don't know, right? They don't know, and we're not going to say, hey, you don't know, you're wrong. No, we can tell them nicely, like, oh, I don't really agree with you, but if that's what they're going to believe in, they need to figure that out on their own, that they're doing the incorrect thing. But for us, again, we just have to keep following our practices and worrying about ourselves, right? Perfecting ourselves. And they said that people, if Socrates came here today and said these things, if Plato said these things, they would have people that were against them, right? And that would hate them, that would have things against them. There's always going to be, like, haters. There's always going to be people that are not in agreement, but it's not about making everyone believe the same way, but just leading by example, right? And doing those right things and making ourselves better. So that's what we should focus on. And yeah, we are going to have to work to spread Spiritism, or work to spread God's laws, Jesus' laws, and Socrates' laws. But we'll eventually, as people evolve, we'll get there. And with that is the end of the introduction. So next week, we can start off right at chapter 1 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. Before we leave off today, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, April 23rd. Talking instead of doing. A meowing cat catches no mice. Yiddish proverb. Talk, talk, talk. Sometimes we spend more time talking about what we want to do than actually doing it. We may need reassurance on what we're doing, that we're on the right track, or we're hoping for someone to give us advice, or we just find it easier to talk than to actually take the first step. I'll make sure that I'm actually doing things, not just talking about doing them. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk about before we start chapter 1, feel free to email me at kardecradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.